you give us. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. I remember starting out in life, getting married to Heather, and the first place we lived was just right outside of our college, and we paid a lot of money in rent. Looking back, though, it wasn't as much as what rent is now. But we paid a lot of money in rent, and it was very interesting because we were constantly in a state of poorness. Can you relate, especially when you're newly married off and you're younger? It's like, oh my goodness. And then we went to St. Louis to go to the seminary, and I remember we got an apartment. It was a great apartment, $440 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. And you're like, wow, that's really cheap. But I think it was cheap because I think all of the mice and the cockroaches also paid a little bit of rent, so it lowered the price ever so slightly. And so but I remember the whole time like, wow, we can barely make ends meet. But right up the street was a Papa John's, $5 carryout. We would eat half the pizza for dinner, and then the next morning, breakfast all set and ready. Like we could eat 2 meals for $5 between the two because we had like no money whatsoever. And then we went out on Vicarage, and then we came back to the seminary, and then went out on college. And I remember the whole time I was there, I was thinking, man, I feel like I would make it if I just owned my own home, right? When you're renting, that's what you're thinking about, right? I just wish I had my own home. Well, then we get out here to California, and we bought a home, and it was great, and we were like, oh my goodness, we've arrived, we've made it. But then we started we had kids, and there was more kids coming, and then we were like, man, there's not enough space. Man, you know what, we have a 3-bedroom. Do we have a 3-bedroom? Yeah, I always forget. We had a 3-bedroom. I said, if only we had like just one more bedroom, then we will have arrived. And I remember also early on, we talked to a lot of people, and they talked about the joys of boating. And I was like, oh man, I know I'll have made it if I buy a boat. So we did. We got a boat. And then we got an extra room on our house thanks to the Lehmans. They helped out with that. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this would be great. And then I was like, man, if we just had one more car, especially as kids are growing up, I think we would finally make it if we just had one more car. So we finally got a car, and then I was sitting around like, man, I've always wanted a motorcycle. Right, guys? And the Lord was good and gracious to me because my wife was like, there's no way you're getting on a death trap and you're going to die and I'm going to be left and the kids are going to grow up without a father. And there's just like guilt just piling on. And then one day she read a book. It was called Wild at Heart. So, guys, if you need to, that's what you got to do. Wild at Heart. And she was like, oh, my gosh, I really need to just let you. So, I'm like, oh, so I got a motorcycle. I'm like, oh, I finally. And then I was like, it would really be cool if we had a hot tub. Because Mark Thomas loves. Do you see what happens in life? You start wanting something, and then you finally get it, and then what do? I just want more. And then more, and then more, and then more, and then more. Today we're going to be talking about a sin that it made it into the top 10 of sins that God doesn't like. If you separate the commandments via the Lutheran way, it's actually mentioned twice. If you don't do it the Lutheran way, then it only shows up once, but that's okay. It's either commandment 9 or 10, or just commandment 10, depending upon how you count the commandments. And it's the sin of coveting. Now, out of curiosity, what do you think coveting is? That's not a rhetorical question, so anyone can answer. What is coveting? Desiring something you don't have. Good. What else? Yes. not being satisfied with what you have been given. Yes, so this is where, again, because that's a problem with coveting. We're like, some people think coveting is, well, it's just wanting more. Well, if that's the case, we're all in trouble, Or wanting it my way. Well, then don't go to Burger King because they'll just give it your way. Or any fast food restaurant except for McDonald's because they always mess up our order. Sometimes, or it's like, has there been a time that you've seen, ladies, you've seen another woman in a dress and you're like, that's a cute dress. I would like to get that dress. Is that coveting? Yeah, so this is where it gets difficult. So, Jason, congratulations. You are the winner of today's test. But the others are not wrong because what the others is the seeds of coveting. So real coveting is, oh, Bob, I really like your car. Do I like your car? I don't know. No, I don't. Maybe I like your car. Let's just say I like your car. And I know, Bob's been in some financial problems lately. So I think if I offer him $200, he'll take. Bob's like, will you? Wait. And if I know that I can defraud Bob out of something, then that would be a case of coveting. I've always thought this too. I've mentioned this only once, but it is my sinful side, and on my deepest apologies. I know how we could grow the church in an amazing way. What we do is we find a church close by that is maybe just about our size, and what you are all going to do is you're going to go and you're going to become members of that church. You're going to flood the church with membership. And then you're going to say, the pastor that's there, it doesn't matter who he is, he's terrible, right? He's not as good as me. And so then you'll call me as your pastor, and now we will have another piece of property, and then we'll have more resources, and then we'll find another church just about that, and then we could start growing. Is this a great church growth strategy or what? I mean, I think this is brilliant. Well, this would be the classic definition of coveting. I look and I see something that I want, and I can't get it by normal means. I mean, if you go house hunting and you're like, well, here's a house I like, is that coveting? No. If you then say, I would like to make an offer on your house, and they accept the offer on your house, are you coveting? No. It's doing it in such a way that is essentially defrauding. I don't always like to, speak against some of the things that our government does, but the law of eminent domain, I think that would fall under the classic definition of coveting, which is like, oh, here's a house. We want the house so that we can bulldoze it and make it a dog park. And so we're going to come in and offer much less, or if all else fails, say eminent domain, and then we can just take your house. That would be defrauding. That would be coveting. The sins that's happening in Micah is sins of very wealthy people who are trying their best to defraud other people from their livelihood, their business, and most importantly, their land. It's tough for us. We still appreciate land, but it was different back in those days. For instance, let's say I had a nice big parcel of land. I had some cows, I had some chickens, because I really like to eat well, and they're very delicious, especially when they're oven roasted or over a barbecue. And let's say that the crops have not been good. I'm losing some money because my kids are super expensive, and I'm like, I need to somehow utilize my land in such a way to leverage it. And it's not a home equity line of credit per se, but what it is some people come along and they say, Mike comes along and he says, well, hey, I will buy your land from you. Now, when they would buy land, it wasn't the way we bought land. It wasn't that I sell the land to you and then it's yours forever and ever and ever. what would happen is every 50 years, there was this special thing called the Year of Jubilee. Oh my gosh, can we restore the Year of Jubilee? I think that'd just be fantastic myself. It was just like a year-long party. But what would happen is it would allow those people who struggled for a little while, and maybe finally with Mike's help, we get the thing going. But then on the Year of Jubilee, guess what happens to the land? It comes back to me in ownership. Now, what would happen if Mike said, well, I just don't think I'm going to do that? This would be that type of defrauding that comes into play. So Micah starts speaking against coveting and some of the evils that are there. And while I do believe that maybe some of you could be in a position to see something and then seek to get it by illegal means, I'm going to guess that most of you really don't struggle with that. I mean, do you struggle like you're walking by, the jewelry store, and so you're like, oh, that tennis bracelet looks good. I think I'm going to go and steal it, because at that point it's more like stealing, but it's also coveting because I really want that, and so I'm going to break some glass and I'm going to grab it and I'm going to take it. Or, yeah, I really like this person's boat, and so I'm going to go and I'm going to steal it, and then the boat owner says, oh, praise God, I really wanted to get rid of the boat anyway, or they're like really upset because they really like their boat. Most of us aren't really in a position to do that. It might come up, but really, coveting, the seeds of coveting are what was spoken before. It's this feeling of discontent, this desire to amass more and more and more, and then ultimately just not being satisfied with what God's given you. Now, this is something that all of us struggle with. Anyone here struggle with greed? Anyone? I know I do. I see that Powerball, and I'm like, ooh, did you hear someone in California just won $7 million? Oh, did you all check your tickets? I checked mine. I didn't check mine. I didn't buy one. But yeah, you're like, what I could do with $7 million. And I know, you are all very generous, and you would immediately give like 10% to the church, and I'll be like, well, okay, I guess so. And the rest you're going to give to like puppy shelters and battered women shelters. So I know you're all, but deep down, part of you is like, but I would really like to take a trip to Monaco and see if I can maybe do some gambling there, do some water sports, just really, really be part of the upper echelon of life. Oh, it's exciting. A little while ago, our alma mater is doing some brand new marketing, and so they wanted to find someone who had just graduated from Concordia. Well, that was Jacob, and so they said, we're gonna have a graduation party. So and they had already secured a location for us. Guess where the graduation party was held? It was held in our Newport Beach home. And I quickly hopped on Redfin to find out how much that home is. It's only $5.5 million, that's all. And it was really awesome because they decorated it for us. And I'm like, oh, so this is what it's like. And so then you start becoming greedy and dissatisfied, and everywhere we turn is this sense of, I am not happy where I'm at. It truly is a happy person who is content with what God has given. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to really like love it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do stuff to maybe improve yourself. I mean, Heather and I, we did finally move out of apartments, and we actually bought a house. So there's nothing wrong with that, but if there is this constant yearning in your heart that there is something more, there is something better, you may want to listen to this sermon. So, Micah chapter 2. And we're going to find out that these sins are contrary to the nature of God. And then if it's contrary to the nature of God, we've got to find out what is the nature of God. And then we have to say, what is the opposite of coveting? So let's take a look. Micah chapter 2. Woe to those who plan iniquity, to those who plot evil on their beds. At morning's light, they carry it out because it is in their power to do it. So Micah is speaking against some very specific people who wake up. Now, I do hope that you guys don't wake up in the morning and you're plotting evil. I'm hoping so. But sometimes we get trapped in that. And so these people are trying to figure out way. And that's why verse 2, this is their sin. They covet fields and seize them, and houses and take them. They defraud a man of his home, a fellowman of his inheritance. Now, this has happened in the Bible, and there's some really interesting stories that are there. There was a king, one time he really wanted this guy's field, so he went to the guy and he's like, hey dude, I'll give you like fair market value. I really love your vineyards. This is really great. Can I have it? And the guy goes, you know, it's been in my family for years. I really love it. I don't think I'm going to give up on it. And so the king goes home and he is totally dejected and he's sad. He's like, he didn't get his property. Well, this king was married to a very evil woman, a very evil queen. You probably know her name because if you just think evil woman, what is the name that comes to mind? Jezebel, right, yeah. So Jezebel's like, why are you being such a wuss? That's a loose translation. And he says, there's an easy way to get the field. Just kill the guy and then take it. And he's like, oh, I think that's a great idea. Oh my goodness gracious. So this is something where people are plotting and planning to try to take advantage of people in a bad situation. Does Disneyland come close to this? Yeah, I mean, it's a $7 churro, and it's really not that good anyway. And the chicken leg, the turkey leg, what is that, like $32 now? There's inflation that's going along with it. And why? They own you because you can't bring your stuff in. You know, movie theaters, I mean, that popcorn is not $12. That is ridiculous. Unless you can then get a refill, then it might be a little bit more worth it, like at Cinema City Theaters. When you take advantage of people who are in a bad situation, you are dangerously close to this idea of coveting. It might not be so grand as taking someone's field, but you got to watch out. So God says, so you got, when you're sitting there and you're plotting evil and you're strategizing how to take things, well, this is what God says. The Lord says, I am planning disaster against this people. Now that is not good, right? If God is plotting your destruction, that means you are really bad. You are way far gone. And so he's planning disaster against this people from which you cannot save yourselves. You will no longer walk proudly, for it will be a time of calamity. In that day, men will ridicule you. They will taunt you with this mournful song. We are utterly ruined. My people's possession is divided up. He takes it from me. He assigns our fields to traders. Therefore, you will have no one in the assembly of the Lord to divide the land by lot. It's kind of this funny thing that here are these people. They defrauded people out of their land. God sent the Assyrian army, and the Assyrian army came, wiped them out. And in 722 BC, if you remember, that was the fall of Samaria. And what did they do with all of the people? They took them off into captivity, and then they took their land. And so these people who took the land from someone else are like, well, that's not fair that you took our land. But didn't you just do the exact same thing? There's this irony that's going on here. And sometimes God does that with us. I found out it's not a one-for-one. It doesn't happen all the time. But God often will wake us up to our sin by having someone come and do that sin unto us. And then we're like, well, that's not fair. And then we realize, I just did that. I'd seen it on, someone had sent me this video, and it's a hilarious video about this young lady, and she's getting ready to break up with her boyfriend. And so, why would you film that? Can you tell me, why would you film that? It doesn't make, you wouldn't film that, right? So this girl is filming herself, and she's like, okay, I gotta break up with him, and it's gonna be really hard, and I'm gonna be really sad, and he's gonna be kind of sad. And so boyfriend gets in the car, and she says, I really gotta talk to you, and I'm really sorry. I think we need to pause our relationship. And he says, oh, I'm so glad you said that. I've been thinking myself too that things weren't really working out. And so, yeah, I think we should have a pause. And the girl breaks out in tears. She's like, are you breaking up with me? And he says, well, you said that. And she says, no. You can't say that. He said, but I just said the same thing. Like, I thought you would be happy. Like, you said we shouldn't see each other, so I said, okay, we won't see each other. She goes, no, you can't break up with me. That's not allowed. And she freaks out, and I'm sitting there watching this whole thing like, does this girl hear herself that she's accusing the guy of something that she herself was doing? It's often God has this sense of humor with that. And so the people are trying to wrestle with this loss. Now, what is the opposite of coveting? And I don't think there's like any one answer. I think we've already even labeled some of it, which is, I think, great. There's agreement, there's contentment, but then there's also, I think it goes a little bit further, which is the act of generosity. I'm really happy. Was it Jacob that said it? That my daddy gives me everything. Did you know that that's exactly what Jesus says? And it's all through Scripture, that when you talk to your Father, he gives you everything you want. Now, out of curiosity, does he really give him everything he wants? No, like, I want Oreos, for breakfast. No, but yet he is still confident enough to say, my daddy gives me. That's what Jesus said, this idea of generosity. I think we've lost that. I think that's the dark side of capitalism, right? The dark side of capitalism is greed and hoarding, as opposed to saying, how can I leverage what God has given to me and be a blessing to other people? When you figure out how to do this without sinning, please talk to me, because I'd really love to know. It's not easy to do, because the moment you're generous with someone else, do you ever say to yourself, wow, I feel real good about myself? And all of a sudden there starts welling up this sense of pride in you. Yeah, I slip into that sometimes, and then I start thinking, wow, I'm such a good person. And I'm sure God's like, okay, yeah, I don't know if that really qualifies. Yes, yeah, thank you for being generous, but watch out that we don't slip down this rabbit hole of thinking so highly of you. What God has given us is good. And when we're generous, that is good. And yet we're always so tempted to slip into sin of either greed or covetousness or pride. Learning how to be a generous person is difficult. One of the ways that the people started getting a little too generous was in the preaching. So who here loves to come to church and feel real good about themselves at the end of the service? Anyone like, you want to come to church and inspire me a little bit, make me feel good, I want to walk away happy, right? Yeah. But that gets intoxicating, especially for a pastor. It really does. And I've joked about this, when you come up, you're like, oh my gosh, Pastor, that was just a great sermon. That was so good. I'm like, hey, now that I think about it, you're right. That actually was a pretty good sermon. Yeah. Another person, oh, that was a great sermon, Pastor. Oh, thank you very much. And then I start thinking to myself, gosh, I get such a good result. Maybe what I should do is radically change my preaching style so that I could preach and just make you all feel happy every day. Does that sound like a good plan? Some of you are like, yeah, actually, that would be a really good idea. I think that'd be fun, actually. But what would happen if all I did was just tell you that everything was good? What if I told you, you know what, just go home, drink some beer, enjoy life? That sounds like a great sermon, doesn't it? Yeah. Oh, now, check it out. Did I already have my beer this morning? What? Yes, I did. I've had those go drink beer sermons, and everyone's like, that's the greatest sermon ever. So I'm like, ooh, maybe I preach that every week. Yeah, check this out. Look at what he says. False prophets. Do not prophesy, their prophets say. Do not prophesy about these things. Disgrace will not overtake us. They're kind of yelling at Micah. Because Micah's like, you know what? All you guys who've been stealing and coveting, there's a group coming in and they're going to take your fields away, and destruction and doom is coming. And the prophets are like, that's horrible. Why would you say that to people? Oh my goodness. Should it be said, O house of Jacob, is the spirit of the Lord angry? Does he do such things? I mean, is God a God of judgment? That sounds awfully bad, right? That's bad. Do not my words do good to him whose ways are upright? Lately my people have risen up like an enemy. You strip off the rich robe from those who pass by without a care, for a siege is laid against it. They will strike Israel. What am I? Oh, I flipped 2 pages, and then I read Micah 5:2, and I'm like, I'm in the wrong spot. There, I did it again. From those who pass by without a care, like men returning from battle. You drive the women of my people from their pleasant homes. You take away my blessing from your children forever. Get up, go away, for this is not your resting place, because it's defiled. It is ruined beyond all remedy. If a liar and a deceiver comes and says, I will prophesy for you plenty of wine and beer, he would be just the prophet for this people. Yeah. Amen. Let's drink wine and beer. Now, again, is there anything wrong with wine and beer? No, of course not. We're Lutherans and we love that stuff. If you are caught in a sin and you have no one around you to say you are not living correctly, you may come to the conclusion that God is happy with your sin. Are there times when churches will take something that is sinful and essentially whitewash it and make it seem appropriate, maybe even godly? Happens all the time. And I know guys who they cannot speak against sin because they want to be liked, and often are trapped in sin themselves. If you go to a church and the pastor never says that you guys do anything wrong, it might be time to look for something else. Now, again, I love the feel-good sermons. Oh my gosh, I love them. They make me feel good. I know they make you feel good. But every now and then, as Micah did, sometimes we have to say, but you guys are messing up, because I think the sin of greed and discontentment, we have that, right? It's not just me, right? Okay, so I need to speak against that. And more importantly, I need to speak against it because I struggle with it. I know pastors who have done some very horrible things. And I know that some of these pastors served at churches that were very large. And some of these pastors served at large churches because they were always giving the people exactly what they want. My job here is not to give you everything you want. Sometimes my job is to make you feel a little uncomfortable, because I need to make myself feel uncomfortable. Because I need to go, are you really content with what you have? Are you really thanking God for all that he has done for you? I've not done it perfectly, but that is something that Heather and I have strived for, especially as we moved from an apartment to a house. I'm so grateful for it. I could focus on the fact that I don't have a $5.5 million Newport Beach home, but let me tell you, I love what God has given to me. Sometimes pastors get discontent at their churches. Not once, at Searchlight have I ever been discontent? It's not because you guys are all perfect. You're all a mess. But so am I, so we work well together, right? And I'm so grateful to be at a place where we can talk real with one another and tell people we need to look at ourselves. If you struggle with greed, and I know that it really hits, especially when you're young, because you work 80 hours a week and you can barely buy enough top ramen to like live. And that's when you get the email, hey, this guy from Nigeria has $1 million for you, just give us your bank account information. Why do those things work? They work because we're greedy. They work because we covet. They work because we want to get wealth fast and possibly illegally. Instead of saying, God, thank you for everything that you have given me because I'm so grateful for it. And when we look at who God is, he is a God of generousness. He pours out so kindly upon you. Now it'll be up to us then to realize, are we just dissatisfied with it, or do we always crave more? If all you're doing is craving more, I guarantee you, you are not enjoying your stuff. If all you're looking at is everyone else's stuff and seeing how nice it is, you're not happy with your own stuff. And God said, be careful of that. And that also goes to relationships, right? If you're in a relationship and all you do is look around and say, wow, everyone else has an amazing relationship, and, well, that guy gets his wife flowers every single week. Why don't I get that? All of a sudden, this covetousness starts out, and this dissatisfaction starts building up, and soon there's this resentment and this anger towards people, or more importantly, towards God, and the next thing you know, we're cursing him and saying we're not happy with what we've got. And then all you are is just whiny and bratty. Now, I can say that because I've done it. I've been whiny and bratty with God, going, why don't I have more? I mean, I tell you, this was the first, when I was first in ministry, that's all I thought about. I knew I was like easily top 5 pastors in the world, okay? You laugh like that's not true, but, or maybe you know it is true. Anyway, there's that pride part. And I'm like, I'm totally going to get this large church, and everyone's going to be flocking from miles away to come and hear me speak. And that's all I thought about. Yes?
We're driving up today, and Michael says, how come it's a small looking building, but it's large inside?
How come it's a small looking building, but it's large inside? I think that's huge. Because it's not about size, is it? I know what it's like to be discontented in church. But I know what it's like to be content in church. Do you want to know what it looks like to me? Right here. And so I was whiny and bratty, and I was like, well, this doesn't make sense. I remember when Searchlight first began in 2001, I had a 5-year plan. At the end of 5 years, we were going to be about 10,000 people. And when it didn't happen, it must be your guys' fault. Instead of taking a look at myself. And then finally, I remember so vividly, I was on a call list to this church. It was in Colorado. And they sent me the paperwork of what their church was like. And I'm like, I started reading through the list. I'm like, this church is perfect. Oh my goodness gracious. They had this mission statement and then these targets and these beliefs that, like, even one of them still sticks to me with this day. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to take spirit-driven risks and be willing to fail often in order to succeed sooner. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm reading, I'm like, this is it. God is finally going to give me the church of my dreams. So then later on, they sent me a letter you're a little too young and a little too inexperienced. And it was funny because I knew the pastor that ended up going there. And I remember seeing the pastor later on, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you're at the, don't even ask what the name of the church, I can't even remember the name of the church. I said, you ended up there. And I said, their mission there. And he goes, it's the worst church in the world. And I go, what do you mean it's the worst church in the world? He goes, all that stuff is all lies. That's what they think they do, or that's what they think that they want, but they don't. It's terrible. I've had nothing but headache and heartache. And that's when I realized, when God's like, Mark, you don't really understand this church thing, do you? I'm going to teach you contentment. I'm going to teach you happiness. I'm going to teach you joy. And he taught me that with finances. He teaches me that daily with my wife. He teaches me with my church. He teaches that with my friendships, where we stop and we go, wow, how great God is. If you are in a season of discontentment, there is nothing wrong with furthering yourself. There never is. Like, maybe I should change a job, or maybe I should buy a different house. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you are constantly saying something else will finally satisfy you, it won't. There's only one thing that satisfies: God himself, the Father who is generous and loves you. And for those of us who still stay in this, because it really is a prison of discontentment, a prison of greed, a prison of being insatiable in our desires. Sometimes we need to cry out, God, help me get out of this. And even if we don't, it's really great when God does it for us then too. And that's what he was teaching these people who all they did was covet land, and they take land, and they defrauded their neighbor. And then soldiers would be coming home, and the soldiers at that point didn't have any weaponry, and they were essentially helpless and hopeless. And as they're walking back, they're tired, and they would go out and they would strip them, and they would take everything that they own. Can you imagine that? And then they would take women who'd maybe lost their husbands, and they'd say, you know what? I'm going to take your land, and there's literally nothing you can do about it. And all of these people, because all they had was this insatiable desire, they were never happy, they were always coveting, and finally God said, I'm going to have to take that all away so that you can learn how to actually do this. And some of us, we say, well, what if we've been doing this? Is there any hope for us? Oh, my friends, there was hope for me, there's hope for you, and there's hope for these people. Listen to what God says. Verse 12. I will surely gather all of you, O Jacob. I will surely bring together the remnant of Israel. I will bring them together like sheep in a pen, like a flock in its pasture. The place will throng with people. In the midst of their covetousness, their greed, their insatiable desires, God says, I have to do something, and it's not going to be pleasant, but I want you to always know something. I will always be your God. And when you feel like you're trapped and there is no hope and there's no way out, God shows up and breaks you out. That's what the next verse says. One who breaks open the way will go up before them. They will break through the gate and go out. Their king will pass through before them, the Lord at his head. He says, you know what, you're going to have some problems, and you're going to suffer a little bit because you need to learn how to be content. And when they were in captivity, they all of a sudden realized, wow, I really miss just having my nice little comfortable home back in the land. Wow, I had my stuff, and I was so greedy and wanted so much more, and then I had it all wiped away. Just like that rich young man who was so excited because he got these crops after crops after crops, and he's building silos and more silos, and he's like, oh my goodness, I'm going to have so much. This is amazing. And God looks at him and says, you don't understand. Tonight, your life will be taken from you. And all of that wealth and all of those riches will literally mean zero. You could have been using your wealth to bless and be generous to other people. And that's what he's doing here. I got to take the land away. You're now going to be prisoners, but my hand of discipline is not one that is on you forever. I'm not like a father who punishes just for the sake of punishing. I'm like a father who punishes because I need you to learn something. And then once you learn that, I'm going to wrap my arms around you and I'm going to hug you and I'm going to say, good job. And not only that, I will break through whatever prison or any problem that you have. I, like a father, will fight for you. My dads, who here would not fight to the death for their children? I know of no father who would do that. Fathers, we fight and we will love our children and we will lead them out when we see them happy, content, following after God. If you are someone who does not have contentment and you want it now, there is an easy way to find it. And that is just look at what you have. Look at what you have and understand that there are a lot of people who don't even have what you have. Now, again, if you look at the other direction and say, but I don't have all of this, and this, I promise you'll never be content. Some of the greatest times in my life when I have stopped and looked at my life and said, look at what I have. I have a wife who loves me and who has been by my side for so many years. I've got 3 incredible children who I love completely. I have a family system that is amazing. And I've got a church. You're better than all the other churches out there. Just saying, yeah, I've got an awesome church. And when I do that, I can't help but be content. I can't help but be thankful for what God has done. And the other thing I have is I have Jesus Christ. And it doesn't matter if I have no wife, no home, no kids, no money, no nothing. If I've got God, I've got everything.